I sometimes think that there is an interventionist email god who deliberately chooses which emails sit next to each other in my inbox. Recently, 2 news articles popped in and they were separated by an irate email from a senior industry executive. Taken together, they both asked and answered an important question about the evolution of the industry. As usual, let me expand on this idea a little before I close with a practical recommendation. The irritated email, which was from an industry executive that I greatly admire, was in response to an article I'd published recently about the 6 great selection pressures acting on the sector's business models. It began very politely, which is always a warning signal, before saying, "I agree that these trends are important, but they all demand different responses. What in practice am I supposed to do?" So I smiled as I wrote the answer that went something like this. You see that the 6 great industry shaping pressures are all equally strong and equally important, but they aren't equally important to every company. So allow me a biological metaphor. Global warming, it's a selection pressure, is leading to a rise in sea temperatures of perhaps 1 or 2 degrees C. To a tropical fish in abundant equatorial waters, this may not make much difference. May not make much practical difference to its environment, and little response is required. By contrast, a polar bear in an Arctic ecosystem that is being shaped by freezing and thawing will need to respond or perish. Same phenomenon, different real-world implications for different species. So how does this metaphor apply to our industry? Well, consider those emails that sandwich my irate friend's email. The first concerned AstraZeneca's appointment of Corey Borgman to the board. Now, she's well known for her criticism of the industry. Ms. Borgman will, I assume, both burnish AZ's reputation and help prevent potential abuses of public trust. This is an example of responding to a selection pressure. That is, a sceptical public that will punish companies that they don't trust, but who aim to sell them very high-priced medicines. Corey Borgman's appointment is therefore much more important for a company like AstraZeneca than it is for, say, a cost-leading generic company whose pricing means that the public see them as some kind of hero. The second email concerned a cooperation between Qualcomm, which is a mobile technology company, and Roche. Now, one of the goals of that cooperation is to make trials more effective, more efficient and less risky. This is a reasonable aim for any pharma company, but it is exceptionally important for Roche, which, along with a handful of other companies, is trying to adopt a business model based on discontinuous innovation. Companies like Roche attempt high-return, high-risk innovation. This means that a shift in gross margin of 1 or 2 percentage points has relatively little impact on their overall risk-adjusted rate of return. But a reduction in business risk, for example, by improving trial effectiveness, can make a disproportionate improvement to commercial outcomes. So Roche's adaptation to the selection pressures caused by the new information technology is much more important for them than it would be for, say, a market-following, less innovative generic company. Both examples, I hope, illustrate the point that the importance of the many selection pressures acting on industry business models is entirely context-dependent, just like the selection pressures implied by climate change. So, what are the practical implications of this? Well, Winston Churchill is often credited with saying that out of intense complexities, intense simplicities emerge. Out of the many conflicting changes that we observe in and around the life sciences sector, 6 major selection pressures emerge. Each of these favours some aspect of a business model and disfavours others. But each of these 6 selection pressures place conflicting demands on life science companies. For example, do we focus on cost reduction or innovation? On integrated or disintegrated business models? A company trying to meet all of these pressures equally and simultaneously will inevitably fail to meet any of them. Instead, firms must consider which selection pressures have the most impact on their business model. Is it globalization or systems medicine? Value chain polarization or network competitors? The information technology shift or the shift towards health economic value? Critical pressures must be addressed, secondary pressures can be managed. So I hope my irate friend read my reply carefully, and with luck the interventionist email god will have sandwiched it in between others that reminded him of the pressures that his business model faces. After all, he has much more to worry about than the articles of a geeky professor.